Now, he came over to New Zealand for a tour, right? And that's when he had a little bit of a drinking issue, if I remember correctly, where didn't the meet director find him passed out in the lobby of the hotel?
Yes, he was actually. We were in Melbourne at the time. There was 3 meets in Melbourne and 4 in New Zealand, and Henry went out with the outback. He went walkabout with some of the abos, and we lost him for about 3 days. And so anyway, somebody found him pretty well unconscious. And they brought him back to the hotel, and the meet director, Andy Norman, in those days, said to Henry, "You'll be going home unless you sober up and you do some training, and you're going to be at the track tonight, and you're going to run 10 by 400, and you're going to do those in 60 seconds, and you're going to be given 20 seconds rest between each one.
Or we send you home.
Or we send you home." Henry went out and did exactly that.
And you watched that?
And I watched that. He, and 4 days later, in Melbourne, in the 10,000 metres, he was almost a lap behind as the leaders came round, and he looked back. It was almost like he woke up.
And this is a 10,000?
In the 10,000.
Okay.
And they were going to catch him by about 4,000 metres. And he then virtually sprinted 2 laps, caught the leaders, and went on to run 27 and 42. 27 minutes, 42 seconds, which was a world-leading time, and we were just absolutely stunned.
And he was about to get lapped.
And he was about to get lapped. And this is against a lot of good runners.
It's Rob DiCostella and all the boys.
Yeah.
They must have been...
We were all pretty... We knew the talent that kid had. Absolutely. He was absolutely... I mean, in Rieti, which is in Italy, we were due to run the 5,000 metres, and a thunderstorm came through just before our race, and it was a complete downpour, and the track was flooded. Well, certainly the first 2 lanes were flooded. The 5,000 metres started. Henry did not want to get his feet wet. He ran in lane 3 and ran away from us, 13:11 to our 13:17. Now, 13:11 was right on his world record.
And he was running in the outside lane.
He was running in lane 3.
Wow. So we move ahead to 76, and you're back at the Olympics, this time in Montreal. And probably, I mean, when I look at the finish times in that, the final and the 5,000, you guys were all separated by, what, a second and a half?
Yeah, 7/8 of a second.
7/8 of a second separated first to fourth. Lasse Viren?
Sorry, 7/10 of a second.
7/10 of a second.
Yeah.
Between first and fourth.
Yeah.
So coming into that last lap, what were you thinking, and how did it play out?
I think, with 300 metres to go, which was my normal to be in a position to dominate and to control the race, I felt confident enough to stay where I was. And you see, and this is it. You have a plan, and you don't, you hesitate. And we know when you hesitate, it's often your loss. And I got into trouble with 200 metres to go, because then Quax and Hildenbrand went past, and suddenly I was 4th. So what I did, and you tend to panic, I took them all around the bend in lane 3. It didn't work for me like it did for Henry. And I ran those 4 or 5 yards further, or the 4 or 5 metres further, and it took it out of me when we were all running pretty well 7/8 effort.
When you came across the line, did you know what place you're in?
I thought I'd got the bronze.
Yeah.
Hildenbrand, he dove across, and I felt that I'd got there before he had fallen.
But then the guy comes over and goes, "You're..."
Yeah, well, they need to do the photograph,
yeah.
And we're all 4 of us are standing there, and they point to Virén, and they pull him over, and then they point to Quax, and then they point to Hildenbrand, and then they wave goodbye to me. Yeah.
So at that point, as you move into the early 80s, you're 1,500 meter, 5,000 meter, and when did you make the decision to do a marathon, and why New York?
Well, I was planning on 5,000, 10,000 at Moscow for the
Right.
Olympics, and that was my training was all headed that way. And the New Zealand team were actually in Villanova training before going on to Moscow, and New Zealand announced the joining of the boycott.
Right.
And so I think at that point I was pretty devastated, and I decided that I didn't really want to go on to Europe to run against everybody in Europe and then sit in the stands while they all went to the Olympics.
Sure.
So a good friend of mine, he said, you know, there's a Diet Pepsi race in Philadelphia next weekend, and Bill Rogers is coming to run. Well, I'd met Bill in Europe.
Sure.
When he had run 10,000 metres, and so I went down and I ran this 10,000 metres, and I finished third in that race, and I kind of had a sense that this was what it was going to be. I had a real good feeling about that, and then I went on to the people who I was staying with. I said, you know, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lease an apartment, and I'm going to start do a month of road races and just see how I go, and then I can always go back to New Zealand.
So you go to New York in '83, and that's the biggest stage. And you know, for somebody who'd already won a bronze medal, I mean, people really don't know who you are. You know, you're sort of new to this world, right? In terms of road racing, in terms of marathon. So what happened during that marathon? And you were racing against a guy from England named Jeff Smith, who was one of the best guys. But Jeff Smith was also somebody who, in his career, had never beaten you.
Right. We'd had a lot of races together.
Yeah, and so, but he's leading, and he's got a, half a mile lead at about halfway?
Yeah, it was almost half. I should say that if you'd asked me in 1972 or even 76 if you'd ever run a marathon, I'd say no way. If you'd asked me in 1980 when I just started running 10,000 metres if I'd ever run a marathon, I'd say no way. But in 1982, when I set the world record for the half marathon, I started to think about a marathon. And I was actually at the World Cross Country in 1982, and Fred Lebow was there. And, of course, he'd been trying to get me to run New York. And I said, Fred, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think I've got my head around this marathon thing yet. He said, but you've just set the world record for the half marathon. And I said, I'll tell you what, Fred, just to get you off my back, if I medal in the World Cross Country this weekend, I'll run your goddamn race. Who was in the finish chute? I don't know how he got into the finish chute. You know, Fred used to get everywhere. And I finished third in the World Cross Country, and the very first person I hit in the finish chute was Fred Lebow. And he was jumping up and down and said, now you're coming to New York. And I said, well, Fred, 1982, I still had 15 more races to run. And it wasn't going to be a marathon.
Right.
But I said, I will run your race next year. That was 1983. Just give me a chance to get my head around this thing. And,
so during that marathon, Jeff Smith's got a half-mile lead at 13 miles in. Were you getting splits? Did you have any idea as you were trying to run this guy down?
Well, I had my splits written down.
This is before the little things that go around your wrist. Rodney would put his 5K, 10K on each finger.
Yeah,
he'd have his split.
5 mile,
all right.
10 mile. I already knew what I was going to be running for 13, so 15, 18, and 23. So those, and I people say, where did you come up with the numbers? And I said, well, kind of, you know, I'd seen once where as an 800-meter runner, because that's really what I started off as, 800. Sure. 800, 1,500, 5,000, 10,000, World Cross Country. And I sort of put all that into the pot, and I said, I should be able to run about 2 hours 9. There was no science in it then, I can tell you. And so that was my splits were based on 2 hours 9. So you can imagine when I went through 5, and it was within 2 seconds, and I thought, whoa, this is pretty good. I think 10 and 13 I was a bit off then. 15 I started to come back on, but you see the leaders were running world record, which was 2 hours 8 and 13 at those days. Yep. And so I was up to 40 seconds off these guys, but kind of within range of what I'd written down. And yet, you know, see, they were, and as a track runner, I'd always, if you're not there with the leaders, you're not going to be there at the finish. It's simply that.